So today we're going to start section 2.1. We're going to look at symbols and terminology of set theory. So there's going to be some spots along the way where things are going to look a little familiar, but by and large, this chapter is going to be things that you haven't seen before. A few of my elementary ed people will have seen some things because it overlaps a little bit with another book we use. But other than that, most of you, this is going to be things that are brand new. To start with, we're going to be looking at sets. So a set is simply a collection of objects. Those objects could be physical objects, right? Like the books on a bookshelf. It could be virtual objects. It could be all the songs in the playlist on your phone. It could be all the people in this classroom. So it could be people. It doesn't have to be objects per se, as in like what's. It could be who's. So all of us would form a set. Elements are the objects that belong to the set. So if we're talking about the books on the bookshelf, maybe one of those books is Pride and Prejudice. Okay. If we're talking about the playlist in your song, one of those is probably your favorite song right now. You all thought of something when I said that, didn't you? Yeah, there's a favorite song you're thinking about right now. If we're talking about the people in this class, that person could be me, or it could be Chris, it could be Amberly, right? There are different ways of notating or notations for sets. There's three in particular that we are going to look at. The first is called a word description. And these word descriptions are very much like the ones I just gave you out loud. And I said, it could be the books, it could be the playlist, it could be this classroom. So I'm going to give you one that's a little mathematical in context so that I can show you how it plays into the other two notations. So another one could be something like this. All whole numbers all right, I need to move that a little bit over. Less than 7. That would be a word description. Okay. Set builder notation actually writes things out in the most abstract way. So the verbal descriptions, more like you're looking at something English, right? So this one looks pretty abstract. It starts with a curly brace, like that. And you're going to put an X and you're going to put a bar. We'll talk about what all of it means. And then there's two different options that can happen next. So one option is that it writes out like what we just wrote out in words. So X is a whole number. Less than 7. So this meets the criterion of being set builder notation. There's ones that are a little bit more concise. You can do the curly brace and put your X. And instead of saying X is a whole number less than 7, you can actually write X less than 7. Right? That's one way of writing X is less than 7 instead of in words. And then you still have to say that X is a whole number. It's really important, that whole number part. That's the part people tend to maybe forget because there's other types of numbers. So you could have fractions, you could have negative numbers, you could have some decimals along the way that don't fit into that criteria even though they're still less than 7. So we want to make sure we get both pieces. The last one, the listing method, is the most concrete. It's going to look the most like math, okay? So it still has those curly braces. But what you do is you actually list all the numbers that are in that description, or list all the items or the elements of that set, right? So you would list all the books on your bookshelf, or you would list all the songs in your playlist. You would list all the members in your family, or whatever the description is. So for this one, and we'll talk more about the actual whole numbers later, as in next class period. But whole numbers include the number 0, so that would be the smallest one. It doesn't include any negatives. And we're going to list them, just like the title says. 0, 1, 2, and how far will I go? 6. I have to stop just short of 7. Obviously, there's sort of pros and cons to these different methods. One of the things that people often don't like about that middle one is the abstractness of it. So let's take a look back there for a moment. This actually says, or the way we read it is, this is all X, right? It's all values. This bar is read as such that. And then we've got the description afterwards. X is less than 7, X is a whole number. The listing method is usually very appealing to people because you can just see them all written out, right? And that's great sometimes. But what if they wanted you to have all the whole numbers less than 50? I don't want to write them out, do you? No. It's like the activity you give children in the elementary school classroom to keep them busy, right? Yeah. Or even worse, what if it's something that instead of saying X is less than 7, it said X is greater than 7? Like it's not even possible to list them all, right? Because they go on forever. So the listing method has some limitations, even if you like it as a statement in general. The other one we're going to look at today, that'll just be this last piece, is the null set. The null set has two ways that it can be written. And I like it that we're talking about this today, because this notation is a notation that I see students use, and there's probably 2 of you in this classroom, I don't know for sure, but I'm guessing, who use this notation and call that 0. You put a slash through your 0 like that. You can't do that for what we're going to be working on because this has another meaning. This is the null set. So if you want to write a 0, it's going to have to look like an O from now on, at least, for the next 4 months, okay? There's one more way to write a null set, and it's a curly brace where we don't write anything inside of the curly brace. We just leave it blank. It's very intuitive. It's a set that's empty. An empty or null set is simply the set that contains no elements. And there's lots of things that would be categorized this way. So I'll give you an example. This set would be, I could write it as a verbal. I don't need it as curly braces. The infants living in my home. Infants living in my home. There are no infants living in my home. That's a null set as it relates to me. That may not be a null set for all of you. You may have nieces or nephews or cousins or brothers or sisters. Maybe you have children yourself. So this is a null set related to my life. Another one you could write down something like this. For example, this one's a mathematical one. I'll write it down to the side here where I've got a little bit of space. Another null set would be something like the whole numbers less than 0. There are no whole numbers less than 0. Whole numbers means the value is 0 and positive. 0 or positive. So there are no whole numbers less than 0, so that would be an empty set. All right, we're going to stop there for today.